Today, we are going to explore the most terrifying shark attacks ever recorded, from a bull shark encounter in the murky waters of Lake Pontchartrain to the deadly thrashings of an oceanic white-tip in Seychelles.
It was February 17, 2015, along the rocky headlands of Cape Byron, New South Wales. The morning sun reflected off the ocean's surface, glittering over calm, rolling swells, yet an undercurrent of tension ran beneath the beauty of the water. Surfers launched their boards from the sand, unaware that a single misstep in the vast expanse of the ocean could prove fatal. Lachlan Mackenzie, 22, was a local surf instructor and lifeguard trainee, known among peers for his steady, unflappable presence in rough waters. He had grown up surfing Cape Byron, spending countless hours reading currents, gauging swell direction, and assessing offshore wind patterns. Friends admired his ability to manage groups of beginners while maintaining personal focus. But those same friends knew he occasionally took calculated risks in the pursuit of better waves or an ideal surf shot. Lachlan's goal that morning was simple: catch early waves before the crowd and observe the offshore conditions for unusual marine activity. He had brought a GoPro mounted on his board to film maneuvers, partly for training documentation and partly for personal study of his technique. Despite being experienced, Lachlan's decisions that day were colored by familiarity and routine. Surfing alone or in small groups at dawn was a standard habit. He assumed his knowledge of current and typical wildlife patterns mitigated risk. He paddled past the break, scanning the horizon, occasionally pointing out schools of small bronze whalers to friends. The presence of dolphins feeding nearby seemed a sign of abundant fish rather than danger. Though he had been briefed at the local surf club about recent great white sightings offshore, Lachlan discounted the advisory, reasoning that shark activity was more common in deeper channels than along the point where they surfed. Great white sharks at Cape Byron averaged 12 to 15 feet in length, with adult males exceeding 2,000 pounds. Their hunting strategy relies on stealth, burst speed, and immense jaw force capable of crushing bone. They patrol along points where bait fish aggregate, often using a sudden, explosive strike from below. Earlier in the week, local fishermen reported large dorsal fins offshore, and other surfers had noted fish skittishly dispersing near the point. During pre-surf checks, one friend mentioned discolored water near the outer break, a potential indicator of predatory presence. But Lachlan waved it off, attributing it to sand stirred by recent swells. He paddled into position, watching the waves for the best set, confident his experience would allow him to manage any unexpected encounter. As he lined up for a medium-sized wave, the water ahead darkened unnaturally. A dorsal fin sliced the surface mere feet from his board. In an instant, the shark surged upward, jaws opening with a precision that betrayed its size and power. According to witnesses, seemingly, Lachlan's first instinct was to kick and push with his arms, but the strike connected to his lower torso, clamping down on his abdomen. He twisted and thrashed, trying to lever the shark's jaws away with hands and knees. But the predator's sheer mass and bite force made leverage futile. Friends screamed and paddled frantically toward him, splashing water in attempts to startle the shark. But Lachlan's body was whipped sideways, his legs snapping against the surface as the shark shook violently. Blood clouded the water almost immediately, mixing with seawater and foam from breaking waves. His attempts to stabilize on the board failed. His chest and torso compressed under the initial strike, limiting breath and movement. The shark shaking, a typical predatory behavior to subdue prey, caused abrasions on the skin, deep contusions, and lacerations that widened as he was dragged across the submerged rock and sand. The attack lasted less than a minute, but was lethally effective. The shark released suddenly, vanishing beneath the swell as rapidly as it had appeared, leaving only red-streaked water and scattered foam. Lachlan's body was not recovered during the first frantic search. Only his board and fins were found. Friends and nearby surfers tried immediate rescue. Lifeguards were alerted and arrived shortly after being called, scanning frantically, but visibility and currents complicated recovery. They combed the area, eventually confirming the absence of a victim. Friends who witnessed the event described the water as moving violently, almost independently, carrying him away from the immediate rescue efforts, emphasizing the suddenness and power of the encounter. In the aftermath, Lachlan's family and friends held a small, quiet memorial at Byron Bay Beach. Candles were placed along the sand, surfboards leaned nearby, and photographs that captured previous trips to honor his dedication to the sport and ocean. Local authorities installed temporary shark exclusion nets at popular points and increased monitoring of great white activity along the coast. It was July 6, 2016, on the murky waters of Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the brackish lake. Evening fell quietly, masking the lurking danger beneath the surface, where the current shifted unpredictably around submerged roots and pilings. Derek Thompson, 35, was a commercial fisherman who had spent most of his life navigating the bayous, swamps, and estuaries surrounding New Orleans. He had learned to read the water like a book, noting subtle changes in depth, current, and wildlife movement. A father of two, he often brought his children and young nephews to swim in waist-deep water during summer evenings, trusting his experience to keep them safe. He had decades of hands-on familiarity with local waters, and his decision to let the boys play near the pier reflected both confidence and routine, though the inherent risk of deeper channels and submerged roots was ever present. Though cautious by nature, Derek sometimes downplayed subtle warnings in favor of maintaining his routine. That evening, he carried his standard fishing knife clipped to his belt and wore a faded t-shirt and shorts, but no flotation devices. His goal was straightforward: spend time with his nephews and enjoy the fading daylight. His familiarity with the lake gave him a sense of control, even when others might hesitate to enter waters where visibility was limited and underwater obstacles plentiful. However, local warnings have been issued sporadically that season after fishermen reported large shadows and unusual splashing near the pier. Some older residents spoke of rare bull shark sightings during low tides, though the information was anecdotal and seldom heeded. Bull sharks, which can reach 7 to 11 feet and weigh over 200 pounds, are known for their ability to tolerate fresh water, moving far upriver and into lakes. They possess powerful jaws capable of tearing through thick muscle and bone, and they often attack quickly with a combination of bite and shake, using their bodies to pin prey against submerged structures. As the sun dipped lower, the family tossed a ball back and forth, laughter carrying across the still water. Derek waded toward a submerged root to retrieve the ball, unaware of the shark gliding beneath the surface. Without warning, the shark struck, its jaws clamping around his upper thigh. Derek yelped, twisting violently, likely in an attempt to free himself, but the bull shark's strength dragged him underwater. His nephew splashed and struck the water with sticks, yelling in terror, but the shark's hold must have been firm, pulling him toward deeper sections of the lake near scattered cypress stumps. Later, forensic examiners concluded that muscle tissue tore under the shark's bite, while sudden thrashing sent a spray of mud and plant debris into the water. Bubbles and disturbed sediment clouded visibility, making it impossible for the nephews to see him clearly. Each convulsive movement caused additional tearing of soft tissue and massive lacerations consistent with a predator of immense power. The attack unfolded over less than 2 minutes but was lethally effective. The nephews witnessed violent splashing as the water churned above Derek's submerged body, his legs nearly severed at the thigh, with extensive damage to surrounding muscle and vessels. Currents carried him closer to the bank where fishermen had begun racing in small boats. One of them placed the call to emergency services within moments, but paramedics couldn't arrive at the scene for nearly 20 minutes due to the remote access points around the lake. Attempts at resuscitation failed. The trauma from deep lacerations, blood loss, and organ damage made survival impossible. In the aftermath, state wildlife officers dragged the nearby channels with grappling hooks to ensure no remains were left behind. Blood-stained clothing, Derek's fishing knife, and parts of his mesh gear bag found tangled in the reeds were recovered. Items later returned to his family. Witnesses provided detailed accounts to investigators, which were archived in local incident reports. No public memorial took place at the site, though relatives quietly placed flowers on the pier in the days that followed. For weeks afterward, fishermen avoided the area entirely, leaving bait buckets untouched and nets hanging unused. It was November 3rd, 2017, off the coast of Oahu, Hawaii, near Sharks Cove. The morning was clear, with calm seas reflecting the pale light of dawn. Yet a subtle tension lingered in the water, a stillness that masked the currents and wildlife lurking beneath. Light winds rustled over the surface, but below, the reef dropped sharply into shadowed channels where the ocean floor disappeared, making the area deceptively dangerous for swimmers and divers alike. Keone Kalani, 28, was a lifeguard in training and avid spearfisher from Honolulu. He spent most of his mornings exploring reefs and cove systems, documenting fish populations, and refining his diving techniques. Known among friends for his skill and caution in the water, he nonetheless carried a streak of curiosity and daring. On this day, he planned to spear a few fish for study and practice his breath-hold diving, confident in his ability to navigate the familiar reef while his friend remained nearby in the kayak. His knowledge of the currents and underwater topography made him feel prepared, even in areas considered off-limits. Though disciplined, Keone's decisions reflected a mix of confidence and calculated risk. He had noticed increased shark activity in recent weeks, following heavy rains that had pushed schools of fish closer to shore. Local advisories had mentioned tiger sharks frequenting the northern reefs, and dive shops posted warnings. Yet he rationalized that his experience and distance from the main surf zone reduced the risk. His goal was to practice, observe, and fish while minimizing disturbance. But the presence of predators in shallow waters added an unacknowledged danger to his routine. The reef itself was a mosaic of jagged corals and sandy channels, where pockets of shadow where the sunlight barely reached. Tiger sharks, capable of growing up to 14 feet and weighing over 1,000 pounds, are known for their broad diets and stealthy approach. They can accelerate explosively and use strong jaws to inflict deep lacerations. Typically solitary hunters, they patrol areas rich with fish and seabirds, often entering shallow waters when prey is concentrated, their coloration blending with the reef and sand. Warnings have been subtle but clear. Fishermen had reported large fins moving near the cove, and other divers mentioned glimpsing sharks during early morning excursions. On prior dives, Keone noticed signs of recent predation, scattered fish scales, bite marks on coral, and ripples where large predators had moved. His friends voiced concerns about approaching the shallower reef where the current converged near deep channels, but Keone dismissed them, confident his awareness and reflexes would prevent danger. As they paddled out in the kayak, the water was unusually murky from recent runoff. Keone dove first, carrying his spear and mask, moving along the jagged reef in search of target fish. A few minutes in, he secured a fish near a crevice, extending an arm to adjust the line when a sudden immense force struck along his side and lower torso, jaws clamping with crushing force. The tiger shark had seized him, his friends witness to everything. He flailed, twisting violently against the coils of muscle and the sharp coral below. Blood clouded the water, spreading rapidly through the otherwise clear morning sea. His friend on the kayak splashed and shouted, attempting to attract the shark's attention while drawing closer to intervene. Pulling a short distance back from the thrashing, he fumbled for his phone sealed in a dry pouch, managing to place a frantic call for emergency assistance as he balanced against the rocking kayak. Keone attempted to use his small diving knife, splashing at the shark's flank. The animal released him momentarily, allowing him a brief, shallow twist, but it quickly returned, striking again with precision. His torso was slammed sideways against the reef, ribs compressing and scraping against the jagged coral, tearing both muscle and skin. The predator shook his body violently, thrashing from side to side, its tail movements tearing tissue and driving him into the reef. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes, though it felt far longer to his friend. Keone's arms thrashed, breaking the surface intermittently, but the shark's grip in the underwater current repeatedly dragged him back into the shadowed channels. Blood surged into the water, mingling with sediment kicked up by the violent movement. Despite repeated stabs and frantic movements, the shark's strength and speed overpowered him. His friend shouted into the phone while splashing continuously, but the cove's sudden depth and overhangs obscured direct access. Emergency crews reached the site nearly 20 minutes after the call, too late to intervene. Keone's body floated limp near a coral outcrop, chest collapsed inward, limbs lifeless. The water around him streaked crimson. Recovery teams brought Keone's body to shore, noting the severity of lacerations and trauma consistent with a tiger shark's bite and subsequent thrashing. The coroner's report, released days later, cited massive blood loss and internal injuries as the cause of death, a finding that confirmed what rescuers had already witnessed at the scene. His dive gear, torn and bloodstained, was retained as evidence before being returned to his family in private. In the weeks that followed, many who had been on the water that morning described difficulty returning. His friend, who had placed the emergency call, withdrew from spearfishing entirely, while several local divers admitted to avoiding Shark Cove at dawn, a time once favored for its calm waters. Informal caution replaced routine. Fishermen spoke in hushed tones of the attack, and kayakers kept to shallower stretches closer to shore. The reef itself remained unchanged, its sharp drop-offs and currents carrying on. the predator's presence a reminder of the thin line between control and vulnerability in familiar waters. It was March 12, 2014, off the coast of the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean. The morning light reflected off glassy waters and the wind was calm, masking the strong currents running along the reef drop-offs. From the surface, the ocean appeared tranquil, but deep below, shadows moved unpredictably over the slopes and canyons of coral. Marcelo da Silva, 40, a Brazilian marine biologist, had dedicated his career to studying reef predators and coral fish behavior. He often traveled alone to remote sites, meticulously cataloging species and tagging individuals for long-term monitoring. Known for precision and patience in the water, Marcelo carried years of experience snorkeling and freediving. But he also preferred working solo to avoid disturbing natural behaviors. On this trip, his goal was to tag apex predators near a deep drop-off while monitoring associated fish schools, relying on careful observation and quiet movements. His experience had taught him both caution and confidence. Marcelo carried specialized equipment, including small camera housings, tagging devices, and a safety float, and he knew the dangers of working near drop-offs. Yet the isolation and his focus on capturing precise footage sometimes led him to underestimate the unpredictable behavior of large predators in open water. He planned to stay within visible range of the small research vessel, but often drifted down current while maintaining attention on the schools of tuna that had been observed earlier. The water over the drop-off was deep, dropping abruptly from 30 to over 100 feet, a corridor frequented by large pelagic predators. Oceanic white-tip sharks capable of reaching 10 feet in length are opportunistic hunters known for aggressive, persistent feeding behavior, particularly when prey is concentrated. They can accelerate quickly, bite with strong jaws, and use rapid twisting motions to disorient and subdue prey. Unlike reef-bound species, they patrol open water expanses and can approach silently from below, using currents and shadows to mask their presence. Previous research teams have reported oceanic whitetips near the drop-offs, particularly when schools of tuna were present. Marcelo had also noticed unusual fin movement below him on earlier dives, and documented minor predation events on smaller tagged fish. Two colleagues aboard the support vessel warned him repeatedly to stay close, pointing out visible fins circling in the distance. But Marcelo waved back, signaling he was fine. As he snorkeled over the edge, the school of tuna clustered tightly beneath him. Marcelo dove slightly to adjust his camera angle, extending a tagging device toward a fish. Suddenly, a shadow surged from below. Witnesses on the boat saw the oceanic whitetip erupt upward, seizing Marcelo by the legs in a violent snap. The impact whipped his body sideways, and they described hearing his scream carrying faintly over the water before blood spread in a widening patch around him. One observer said Marcelo thrashed desperately, striking downward with his arms. His torso rose briefly above the surface, but the shark jerked him under again, its head shaking side to side while his legs bent unnaturally at the knees. Blood and foam bubbled on the surface, mixing with a red haze that drifted down current. Another crew member reported seeing Marcelo's chest slam against the water as the shark twisted, rolling him half out of the sea before dragging him back down. They noted his arms clawing at the surface, then falling limp after repeated pulls beneath the waves. The water near the drop-off turned crimson, the outline of his body flashing once more before vanishing below. The attack lasted less than 3 minutes by the crew's estimate. Several shouted into radios for emergency response, but there was no immediate way to rescue Marcelo without putting others in danger. The witnesses agreed that the shark maintained its grip, shaking and dragging him until he disappeared into deeper water, leaving only a broad red stain and floating gear. Divers later recovered fragments of clothing, his safety float, and one tagging device. Colleagues noted the discovery as grimly efficient, noting there were no remains, only equipment and the churn patch of sea that marked where Marcelo had been taken. In the days that followed, his absence was felt most in the routines of the project itself. Logbooks showed unfinished data entries, and his cameras contained partial footage of tuna schools circling near the drop-off. The tagging device he had prepared was cataloged and stored, its unused state a stark reminder of the interrupted work. Within the research community, his loss circulated quietly through professional channels, emails, conference mentions, and informal discussions about risk management. The story became less about the individual and more about the vulnerability of even the most skilled scientists when working alone in open water. It was July 22, 2018. Off the rocky coast of False Bay near Cape Town, South Africa. Dawn broke through low-gray clouds, the surface of the water broken by a steady wind and streaked with runoff from the previous week's heavy rains. The inlet looked calm from a distance, but beneath the surface, darker movements were at play. Simon Vandermeer, 33, was a seasoned commercial freediver and abalone collector. He had built his reputation on long hours in South Africa's kelp forests, often taking assignments others turned down because of the conditions. Simon was known among fellow divers as solitary but capable, with an ability to stay underwater for extended stretches without panic. His livelihood depended on entering the water before competitors, and he preferred dawn dives when the coastline was quiet. The approach was risky, but it was also why he had steady work in an unpredictable trade. He lived in Cape Town with his brother, who often reminded him not to dive alone, but Simon argued that solitude was his way of staying focused. His routine was to slip into the water at first light, make short, concentrated dives, and return before motorboats and patrols became active. On this particular morning, his goal was training rather than harvesting, refining his stamina for the peak abalone season. He had checked tide tables, packed his gear, and gone out alone. His choices were deliberate, if not cautious. The shoreline that morning was layered with mist above the surf, the kelp forest stretching in dark tangles close to shore. Small waves broke against rocks, and foam drifted into channels. Visibility underwater was low due to runoff, a murky green that masked distance. Warnings had circulated in recent weeks. Local fishermen had noted unusual movement near the kelp beds, and runoff from rains was well known to attract predators closer inshore. Several divers had advised caution, reporting baitfish scattered in patterns that suggested larger hunters nearby. Bull sharks are common in South African waters, but less discussed than great whites. Unlike whites, bull sharks tolerate both saltwater and freshwater, often moving into estuaries and bays after rainfall. Stocky and muscular, they average 7 to 9 feet in length, with a bite force among the strongest of all sharks, capable of breaking bone in one clench. Known for their unpredictability, they're often near-shore hunters, using poor visibility to ambush prey. Simon was aware of these concerns, but considered his early timing and his own discipline enough protection. His decision to enter alone meant fewer distractions, and he trusted his experience over rumor. At 6:10 a.m., Simon was in the water. From their fishing boat anchored about 330 feet offshore, 3 men watched him submerge and resurface, adjusting his mask and fins. The men knew the area well, accustomed to seeing divers at work, but the conditions that morning struck them as poor for visibility. One recalled seeing scattered movement just below the surface that looked like baitfish scattering. Minutes later, they saw sudden turbulence where Simon had last surfaced. Violent splashing erupted, followed almost instantly by a wide swirl of red water expanding outward. An 8-foot bull shark briefly broke the surface. Its jaws clamped onto Simon's torso before pulling him down. The crew shouted as they maneuvered their boat closer, but the attack was already underway. Simon's body reappeared in fragments of motion, his arms flailing above the surface for only seconds before vanishing again beneath a wash of foam. The shark rolled with him, twisting his body so violently that the fisherman could see his dive fins lift out of the water before dropping back under. The sound of thrashing carried across the surface, heavy slaps echoing off the hull of their boat. One crewman hurled the rope weighted with a buoy, but the distance was too great and the water too chaotic. More red plumes spread outward through the kelp, blotting the surface in uneven bursts. For nearly a minute, the shark dragged him beneath, its power visible only in the sudden jerks and circles of water that broke around the kelp stalks. Then the movement slowed. The men saw no further signs of Simon, only drifting blood and disturbed kelp stems swing back into place. The fishermen later described the silence as abrupt and unnatural, as if the water had sealed over what they had just witnessed. Immediately after losing sight of him, one of the crew grabbed the boat's radio. At 6:19 a.m., they contacted harbor authorities, reporting a shark attack in progress near False Bay's kelp beds. A rescue vessel left Kalk Bay Harbor within minutes. By the time the responders reached the site, approximately 12 minutes later, the water had gone quiet. The fishing boat pointed them to the location, but there were no further disturbances to track. Hours later, Simon's body washed ashore south of the inlet. Rescuers documented catastrophic injuries, deep arcs in his torso consistent with a bull shark's jaws, and one leg nearly severed at the thigh. His wetsuit was shredded, the weight belt ripped open, matching the fisherman's descriptions of twisting and pulling. Blood loss had been immediate and overwhelming, leaving no chance of survival even if he had been retrieved within minutes. Simon was buried in Cape Town days later in a private graveside service attended by family and a few colleagues. His name faded quickly from headlines. Yet along False Bay, the memory lingered in small practical ways. Divers avoided the kelp beds at dawn. Fishermen hesitated before casting lines too close to the inlet, and locals pointing quietly to the stretch of water where one of their own had disappeared almost without a trace. It was March 23, 2013. At Troy Basins on Reunion Island, the water looked calm to the small group of surfers who went out that afternoon. The waves came in at a steady pace, not too strong, and the breeze carried the smell of salt across the beach. For one man, a normal surf session was about to turn into something tragic. David Rousseau was 28 years old, a local electrician from St. Paul. He was known as a reliable worker, the kind of person neighbors trusted to fix wiring or restore power after storms. Away from work, his main outlet was surfing. He had learned to ride waves as a boy, and though he never treated it as a sport to win or show off, it became part of his weekend rhythm. His approach to life was careful, not reckless, and even in the water, he wasn't known to push limits. That Saturday, he told friends he wanted only a short session, just a couple of waves before going home. It seemed like a safe plan close to shore, in familiar waters, with 3 friends alongside him. Troy Basins was a stretch of coast with jagged volcanic rocks along its edge and waves that broke clean when conditions were right. That afternoon, the beach was unusually quiet. Thin clouds passed overhead, dimming the sun at times, while the water shifted between shades of blue and green. On the rocks, fishermen cast their lines, the wind carrying the steady sound of waves hitting stone. Past the break, the reef dropped off quickly, leaving deep water close to where the surfers waited. That same depth made the area attractive to more than just surfers. Bull sharks often patrolled these waters, moving in from deeper channels to hunt close to shore. Growing over 10 feet long and built for raw power, they were among the few shark species comfortable in shallow surf zones and even river mouths. Their strong jaws could crush bone in a single bite, and their presence around Reunion had already led to a series of fatal incidents. Authorities responded with bans and warning signs, but by 2013, Troy Basins was still a place where the risks were known. That day, the warnings were visible and verbal. Surfers noticed the beach was emptier than usual. Fishermen waved from the rocks, signaling for them to leave the water. A handful of locals had avoided entering altogether, but for David and his friends, the sight of steady waves and no obvious fins convinced them it was worth staying. The group stuck close together, no more than 50 yards from shore. For half an hour, they shared the water without issue. They traded small waves and sat on their boards in the lulls, talking and waiting for the next set. The calm almost made them forget the signals from shore. David caught one wave, rode it smoothly, and began paddling back toward his friends. That was when the surface shifted behind them in a violent burst. A bull shark came up fast and slammed into the bottom of David's board. The hit knocked him straight into the water. His friends froze, sitting stiff on their boards as the surface thrashed with bubbles and foam. David came up once and let out a short cry before the shark grabbed his leg. In seconds, the water turned red, spreading out in a wide cloud around them. The shark let go for a moment, circling with its fin cutting the surface. In the rush of panic, David's friends tried to paddle toward him but stopped when the fin swept close by. The shark struck again, this time grabbing his torso. It twisted and rolled, dragging him beneath the surface. From the rocks, fishermen waved their arms and shouted, but there was nothing they could do. The attack lasted less than a minute, yet for those watching, it felt drawn out. The water churned with foam and bubbles before going still again. For a moment, David's arm broke the surface, then disappeared. His board floated back up, scarred with deep tooth marks on one side. A cloud of blood spread wider, carried by the current toward the reef. His friends, too afraid to move, stared at the place where he had vanished. Rescue calls were made immediately. Within minutes, lifeguards on jet skis arrived and began scanning the water. The fishermen pointed to where the red stain had been, but by then the current had moved it farther out. Teams searched for hours, circling the coastline with boats. They recovered David's board, but no body. The ocean had claimed what was left. The community response was quiet but heavy. A funeral was held days later in St. Paul. More than 200 people came. Family, friends, co-workers, and neighbors. The service was modest, with no reporters inside, though the story made its way in the local papers. His friends who had been in the water sat together, still in shock. For them, the memory of what they had seen was enough to silence any words. Authorities responded by reinforcing the restrictions already in place. Additional shark nets were installed, and patrols increased at known surfing spots. Officials reminded the public that the bans existed for a reason, even if they were often ignored. For the people of Reunion, it was another reminder that the island's waters, though beautiful and familiar, carried risks that no one could fully control. It was June 14, 2014. At Ras Mohammed National Park, on the southern tip of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, the water looked calm and harmless. Sunlight struck the surface and lit up the reef below. Tourists leaned over the boat, pointing at the shades of blue stretching into the distance. For most of them, it was just another holiday outing. But among the group was a man seeing the Red Sea for the first time. His name was Lucas Stein, 34, a mechanic from Hamburg, Germany. He spent his days repairing trucks and heavy equipment. Time off was rare, and this was the first trip abroad he and his wife had managed in years. Lucas had always been fascinated by the ocean. He read about coral reefs, watched documentaries, and dreamed of seeing them in person. Diving seemed too demanding, but snorkeling offered him a way to experience the sea without the weight of tanks or training. At home, he was known as practical, steady, and cautious. He avoided nightlife, preferred quiet evenings, and rarely sought thrills. The Red Sea was supposed to give him peace more than excitement. His plan was simple: spend time in the water, swim above the reefs, and take photos to remember it. When their hotel offered a guided snorkeling tour, Lucas signed up quickly. He told his wife it was safe. There were guides, other tourists, and calm weather. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. That morning, conditions were perfect. The sun was bright but not harsh, and the sea carried only a breeze. The reef stretched below the surface, a wide patchwork of coral and fish. Silver baitfish darted together in schools, breaking apart when larger shadows moved near. The water was unusually clear, giving the group long views of the reef beneath them. To those watching from the boat, it looked like a safe place to swim. But beneath the surface, larger predators were never far. Oceanic white-tip sharks were known in these waters. They can grow more than 10 feet long and were built for strength and endurance. Unlike many sharks that kept their distance, white-tips often approach divers and boats without fear. They swim slowly but deliberately, with wide fins and a steady circling pattern. Their bite is powerful enough to crush bone, and they have a reputation for persistence once drawn in. In the Red Sea, a handful of incidents had already involved them, but guides usually downplayed the risk to tourists. There had been warnings that week. Local fishermen spoke of sharks seen closer to shore. Some divers reported more encounters than usual, but guides reassured visitors that attacks were rare. They told the group to stay together and follow instructions. Lucas, his wife, and 4 other tourists entered the water with masks and fins. The guide led them out, pointing at coral formations and small fish. At first, everything went as planned. The group floated above the reef, drifting with the current. Bright fish passed below them, and sunlight cut across the water. Lucas, always curious, drifted a little farther from the group. He became absorbed in a school of parrotfish, their bright colors flashing as they nibbled at coral. His wife kept him in sight, but noticed he was edging away. Beneath him, a darker shape moved. An oceanic white-tip rose from deeper water, circling slowly at first. It passed beneath the group, its long fins standing out in the clear water. Lucas was just outside the circle of swimmers when the shark turned. It rushed upward and clamped onto his arm and side in a single bite. The impact spun him, and his snorkel mask slipped free, floating to the surface. He let out a muffled cry as bubbles rushed from his mouthpiece. Blood spread quickly in the water. The shark released him briefly, then circled back. The guide shouted and splashed, waving fins and striking the water with sticks they carried to deter predators. The rest of the tourists were pulled back toward the boat in panic. Lucas tried to stay afloat, but the shark returned, biting again across his torso. Witnesses later described seeing the roll of its body as it thrashed, pulling him down. The water turned red in wide clouds that spread through the current. His wife and others on the surface saw his arm rise once, then vanish beneath the foam. The shark circled once more, then disappeared with Lucas below. His mask and a trail of bubbles were all that remained at the surface. Guides pulled the survivors onto the boat, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the empty water. Rescue calls were made as the boat sped back to shore. Divers returned the next day to search the reef, scanning the drop-offs and channels. They recovered fragments of Lucas's gear, a fin and the broken strap of his mask, but no body. With currents moving swiftly and predators active in the area, the search ended quickly. Back in Germany, his wife returned home alone, still shaken. The story was reported briefly in German papers as a tourist accident abroad, but it drew little attention outside of local coverage. In Egypt, officials suspended snorkeling tours at that reef for several weeks, citing safety concerns, before quietly reopening when demand returned. To the guides and tourists who had been there, the memory of the red water and the helplessness of watching it unfold stayed long after the search ended. It was July 22, 2017. Off Isla Morada in the Florida Keys, the water was calm and bright under a hot sun. The sea spread wide and flat with only a faint ripple from the morning breeze. A small skiff drifted near a reef line. 3 men aboard and 1 already in the water. For them, it was another weekend spearfishing trip, something they had done many times before. But that morning would not end in the way any of them expected. Tony Ramirez was 29 years old, a dive shop worker from Key Largo. He spent his days setting up gear for tourists, guiding beginners on shallow dives, and keeping equipment in order. Around town, he was known as confident in the water, someone who moved easily in the ocean. On weekends, he joined his cousins to hunt fish. They grilled what they caught at family barbecues, a tradition that brought everyone together. For Tony, fishing was more than food. It was a way to stay connected to the water he grew up around. He had been diving since he was a teenager and was comfortable holding his breath at moderate depths. He wasn't reckless, but he, like many locals, grew used to seeing sharks without trouble. He believed that as long as he stayed alert, there was little real risk. Sharks circled often in the Keys, but most encounters ended with the predator moving on. That quiet confidence shaped his choices, even when the signs around him suggested more caution. That morning, the setting was ideal. Below the surface, the reef stretched in patches of coral and seagrass, darting fish flashing silver in the light. The water was so clear that shadows from larger fish could be seen moving over the bottom. On the boat, his cousins kept watch, the skiff rocking gently on the current. The sound of gulls carried overhead, and for a while it seemed like any other peaceful day on the water. But the Florida Keys were also home to tiger sharks. These predators often appeared around fishing and diving spots, drawn by the scent of blood or the sound of struggling prey. Tiger sharks can reach more than 12 feet in length and weigh close to 1,000 pounds. With broad heads, striped bodies, and serrated teeth, they were built for power. Unlike some species that stay at a distance, tiger sharks are bold and opportunistic. They home in on bleeding fish, and divers carrying their catch were at greater risk. That week, other spearfishers had mentioned losing fish to sharks. Locals said there seemed to be more sightings near reefs, though no serious incidents were reported. The warnings were easy to ignore. For Tony and his cousins, sharks were just part of the environment. They believed that as long as no one panicked, they would be safe. Tony dove down about 25 feet, spear gun in hand. He waited, scanning the reef until he spotted a grouper moving along the rocks. He lined up the shot, released the shaft and struck. The fish jerked violently, blood seeping into the water. He clipped the catch to his belt line, a common practice, and kicked toward the surface. The trail of blood spread behind him as he rose, carried by the current. From the bow, his cousin spotted a large fin cutting through the water toward him. They shouted, but the shark was already closing in. A tiger shark rushed in from the side, drawn by the bleeding fish. Its jaws snapped at the grouper, but it caught more than that. Its teeth tore into Tony's thigh as it hit, spinning him and knocking the fish loose. Tony tried to kick free, bubbles streaming up as he thrashed. His cousins threw a rope, one of them reaching with a pole, but the shark circled back quickly. It struck again, clamping onto his leg and rolling in the water. Blood spread in a wide cloud, carried fast by the current. His cousins watched as his arm broke the surface once before he vanished under the foam. Then the water calmed. The fin disappeared as the red cloud drifted across the reef. The only things left floating were his spear gun, the shaft bent and marked with deep tooth impressions, and the belt clip where the fish had been. They radioed for help and boats in the area responded. Within an hour, the Coast Guard joined the search. Divers swept the reef, moving through channels and along drop-offs. They recovered the broken spear gun and a torn strap from one of his fins, but no body. The search continued for several days before officials called it off. Back in Key Largo, the news spread quickly. His family waited at home for updates, hoping for some closure. None came. Days later, a memorial service was held, attended by family, friends, and co-workers from the dive shop. They shared stories of his calm manner in the water, of the weekends he spent bringing home fish for everyone to share. The service was simple but heavy. The loss felt across the small community. Authorities reminded divers afterward about the dangers of spearfishing in shark-heavy waters. They repeated warnings about carrying fish attached to belts, about blood drawing predators in minutes, and about the speed in which tiger sharks responded. It was not new advice, but the incident gave it new weight. It was February 27, 2016. At Lighthouse Beach near Ballina in New South Wales, the air was heavy with late summer heat. The water stretched calm and flat at first glance, sunlight flashing across the surface. Families walked along the sand, children carried buckets, and a few older swimmers waded knee-deep in the surf. It looked peaceful, but the warnings that day told another story. Earlier reports had noted a large shadow offshore, and lifeguards had urged caution. Sophie Turner was 17 years old, a high school student from Ballina. She grew up near the coast, often helping with their school's beach cleanup programs. Teachers described her as quiet but dependable, someone who gave her time without complaint. Swimming was one of her hobbies, though she had never been part of the surfing crowd. To her, the water was a place to relax, not to compete. That afternoon, she joined 3 classmates for a swim. They had finished an early weekend project and decided to cool off at Lighthouse Beach. It wasn't far from home, familiar to them all. Sophie's parents had allowed the trip, knowing she stayed close to shore and surrounded by friends. She was there to enjoy the water, chat with her friends, and make the most of the long summer day. Though lifeguards had flagged earlier concerns, the sight of others waiting at the edge gave the group reassurance. The setting looked harmless on the surface. The beach stretched wide, backed by low dunes and grassy patches. The water was waist deep where Sophie entered, pale green with sand shifting beneath each wave. From shore, everything looked normal, yet further out, the color of the water darkened. The currents were known to draw fish in, and the quiet gaps between waves gave the sense of something unseen moving just below. Great white sharks often patrolled this coast. They can grow over 20 feet long and weigh more than a ton. They hunt seals and fish, but are known to pass close to beaches, following schools of mullet or tuna. With powerful jaws, serrated teeth, and bursts of speed that can exceed 20 miles per hour, they're among the most capable predators in the sea. Attacks on humans are rare, but when they happen in shallow surf, the results are often severe. That week, several shark sightings have been logged along the north coast. At Lighthouse Beach itself, lifeguards had cleared surfers earlier in the day after spotting movement beyond the breakers. Locals said sharks had been lingering around baitfish schools. Signs were posted, but many beachgoers ignored them once the patrol boats left. To some, the warnings felt routine. Sophie and her friends noticed others in the shallows and decided that staying waist deep seemed safe enough. For a while, the group stayed near the shallows, splashing each other and enjoying the warm water. Sophie drifted a little farther out, letting the small waves lift and drop her shoulders. She brushed her hair back, glancing at her friends on the sand. The beach felt calm until a sudden splash broke the surface beside her. A great white lunged from below, clamping onto her thigh. The hit pulled her sideways and dropped her under. The sand stirred up as she kicked upward, but the shark shook her, and the water quickly turned red. Her friends shouted and tried to move closer, but fear held them back. The shark circled once and came again, locking onto her hip. This time it dragged her into deeper water, pulling her away from the waist-high spot where the others froze, too stunned to follow. Two bodyboarders close by tried to help, slapping the water and kicking toward her to drive the shark away. They reached the spot just as her arms surfaced, then slipped back under the spreading red water. The shark's fin cut through the shallows one last time before turning toward deeper water. On shore, the shouting stopped, and the beach grew quiet except for the steady sound of waves pushing the blood closer to land. Lifeguards on jet skis arrived within minutes, alerted by shouts and frantic gestures from beachgoers. They circled the site, scanning the water. For several tense minutes, they searched, but Sophie was gone. Her friends stood on the sand crying, wrapped in towels by bystanders. Rescue boats and helicopters joined, sweeping the shoreline and beyond the headland as dusk approached. After hours of searching, divers recovered partial remains caught in a current near the reef line. Her swim gear was torn, straps frayed and marked by teeth. Authorities ended the search later that night, confirming the tragedy. At her school, word spread quickly. The next evening, a vigil was held in the gymnasium. Dozens of classmates and teachers gathered in silence, leaving flowers and photographs at the front. The room carried the weight of shock more than words. For a town used to living with the sea, the loss hit deeply, especially among the younger students who had joined Sophie in community projects. Authorities responded by increasing patrols along Balena's beaches. New drone surveillance programs were launched, and more warning systems were put in place during the summer months. Experts reminded residents that shark presence along the north coast was seasonal and tied to natural feeding patterns. They urged people to take the warnings seriously. It was June 18, 2018. The night at Ka'anapali Beach on the island of Maui looked calm, the water smooth and silver under the moonlight. Tourists wandered the sand in small groups, voices carrying faintly across the shore. The air was warm and heavy, the kind of night that seemed safe and inviting. But in the darkness beyond the reef, the sea held more than just waves. Daniel Carter was 29, a high school history teacher from Ohio. At home, he was steady and dependable, the kind of person both colleagues and students trusted. He lived a quiet life, filling his days with lessons, grading, and small projects around the house. Vacations were rare. He and his wife Emma had saved for years to afford this trip. their first journey outside the mainland. They had married only weeks earlier, celebrating with family before flying to Hawaii for their honeymoon. Daniel wasn't careless. Friends described him as practical, sometimes overly cautious. But that night he wanted to do something simple, something memorable to mark the trip. After dinner, as couples strolled along the beach, he suggested a swim under the moonlight. To him, it was harmless, a chance to enjoy the ocean away from the heat of the day. Emma hesitated, remembering the resort staff's reminder that night swimming wasn't advised, but Daniel promised they'd stay close to shore. The beach seemed peaceful. The tide rolled in gently, washing over footprints in the sand. Bars and hotels behind them played music, their light stretching faintly across the water. A few people walked along the shoreline, some carrying towels, others just enjoying the view. Daniel and Emma slipped off their sandals and waded in. The water was cool against their skin, a relief after the humid evening. Emma stopped at waist depth, while Daniel went a little farther, floating on his back for a moment and looking up at the stars. Beneath the surface, the conditions were different. Tiger sharks are common in Hawaiian waters, often growing 12 to 16 feet long and weighing more than 1,000 pounds. Known for eating almost anything, they're bold hunters and do not shy away from people. Unlike reef sharks, which often keep their distance, tiger sharks are curious and unpredictable. At night, their advantage grows as they move closer to shore to search for prey in the low light. For locals, this was common knowledge, but to many tourists, it was just another bit of advice that could be ignored. Earlier in the day, fishermen had been seen chumming farther down the coast. It was a routine practice, but one that sometimes drew sharks closer than usual. Staff at the resort had reminded guests to avoid the water after sunset, but warnings are easy to brush aside when the evening feels calm. Emma called out softly for Daniel not to swim too far. He waved back, reassuring her that he was fine. A couple walking on the sand noticed the disturbance offshore, a fin slicing briefly above the surface before vanishing. They assumed it was a dolphin, common in the area, and kept walking. In the water, Daniel treaded calmly, turning back toward Emma. He felt the current shift against his legs, followed by the sudden flicker of a shadow passing underneath. The strike came without warning. From below, the tiger shark surged upward, its jaws clamping onto his leg. The pull was immediate, jerking him under. Water splashed violently, breaking the stillness of the night. Emma screamed from where she stood, frozen in the shallows. Daniel thrashed, his arms flailing against the surface, but the strength of the shark was overwhelming. Blood spread quickly, visible under the moonlight. The shark released him for a moment, circling with its fin cutting the surface. Daniel tried to push himself upright, but the shark lunged again, biting into his torso and dragging him sideways. Waves turned red as he disappeared into the turbulence. Two bystanders shouted from the sand, but no one entered the water. The rolling motion of the shark shook Daniel like a rag doll, churning froth and blood in the surf. Emma stood waist deep, screaming for him, unable to move closer. His hand broke the surface once, reaching upward, then slipped back under as the shark twisted and pulled him deeper. The attack slowed as suddenly as it began. The fin surfaced once more, cutting across the shallows before vanishing into deeper water. The ocean settled again, leaving only foam and a spreading red stain carried toward shore by the tide. The silence that followed was broken only by the waves lapping the sand. Resort staff rushed to Emma and pulled her away from the water as emergency services were called. Boats and divers searched through the night, sweeping the nearby reef with lights. By morning, they recovered only Daniel's torn swim trunks and his wedding band lodged in a patch of coral. His body was never found. The story appeared in local news, noted as another reminder of how active tiger sharks have been that summer. Authorities repeated warnings about night swimming, posted new signs along Ka'anapali Beach and nearby resorts. Locals spoke quietly about how familiar these dangers were, yet how often tourists ignored them. Emma returned to Ohio with her family. The funeral was held in a small church, attended by more than 300 people. Students, teachers, neighbors, all gathered to support her. There was little to say, except that the sea had taken them. For Maui residents, the case joined a long list of tragedies tied to the ocean, proof that even calm water can hide danger. The ocean was unchanged, its waves carrying on as before. But for those who watched that night, and for Emma who returned home alone, it became a lasting reminder of how quickly beauty and danger can exist in the same place. It was March 23, 1994, and the NOAA research vessel Discoverer cut through the endless blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, approximately 300 miles east of Easter Island. The remote water stretched endlessly in every direction, creating an almost otherworldly sense of isolation that few humans ever experience. The nearest landmass lay hundreds of miles away, leaving the 300-foot research ship as a tiny speck of civilization floating in an ocean that covered nearly half the planet's surface. Above, the sun blazed down from a cloudless sky, its rays dancing across the gentle swells that rocked the research vessel with a hypnotic rhythm. The air temperature hovered around 78 degrees Fahrenheit, warm and inviting, carrying the distinctive salt-tinged breeze that only exists in the deep ocean, far from any continental influence. The water itself maintained a comfortable temperature, its crystal-clear turquoise surface revealing depths that plunged thousands of feet into an abyss that remained largely unexplored by human science. The Discoverer represented the cutting edge of oceanographic research, equipped with sophisticated sonar systems, deep-sea sampling equipment, and laboratories that allowed scientists to analyze their findings in real time. The vessel's mission in these remote Pacific waters involves studying ocean currents, marine life patterns, and the complex ecosystem interactions that occurred far from coastal influences. For months, the ship had been collecting data that would contribute to humanity's understanding of how the world's largest ocean system functioned. 19-year-old Heather Boswell had been living aboard this floating laboratory for several months as part of her 6-month assignment with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Originally from the Pacific Northwest, Heather had always felt drawn to the ocean's mysteries. Her role as a galley steward meant she was responsible for preparing meals for the crew of 30-plus scientists, researchers, and support staff who called the Discoverer home during their extended research missions. Though her job wasn't glamorous, involving long hours in the ship's kitchen preparing everything from breakfast for early rising researchers to late-night snacks for crew members working around the clock, Heather embraced every aspect of the adventure. She had grown up near the coast and spent countless hours exploring tide pools and watching waves crash against rocky shores. But nothing had prepared her for the vastness and power of the open ocean. During her months aboard the Discoverer, Heather had witnessed phenomena that few people ever see. She had watched pods of dolphins racing alongside the ship, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with effortless grace. She had seen flying fish launch themselves from the waves, gliding for hundreds of feet before disappearing back into the blue depths. At night, she'd stood on deck watching bioluminescent plankton create trails of light in the ship's wake, turning the ocean into a canvas of living stars. The research mission had been proceeding smoothly, with scientists collecting valuable data about deep ocean currents and marine ecosystems. The crew had developed a comfortable routine over their months at sea, balancing the serious work of scientific research with the camaraderie necessary for maintaining morale during long periods of isolation. Regular recreational activities were essential for crew welfare, and swimming breaks in the open ocean have become a cherished tradition when weather and sea conditions permitted. On this particular afternoon, conditions were absolutely perfect for a swimming break. The sea was calm, with swells barely reaching 3 feet in height. Visibility in the water extended for dozens of feet in every direction, and the absence of any significant current made swimming safe and enjoyable. The ship's captain, after consulting with the safety officer and checking weather forecasts, authorized a recreational swimming period for crew members who weren't on duty. Great white sharks represent one of the ocean's most perfectly evolved apex predators, having remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. These magnificent yet terrifying creatures can grow up to 20 feet in length and weigh over 5,000 pounds, making them among the largest predatory fish in the world's oceans. Their bodies are perfectly designed for hunting, with a torpedo-shaped form that allows them to reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour in short bursts. The great white's most fearsome feature is undoubtedly its mouth, which contains multiple rows of razor-sharp serrated teeth designed specifically for tearing flesh from large prey. These teeth are constantly being replaced throughout the shark's lifetime, with new ones moving forward to replace those lost during feeding. The shark's jaw muscles can generate a bite force of up to 4,000 pounds per square inch, powerful enough to crush bone and sever limbs with ease. Great whites possess an array of sophisticated sensory systems that make them incredibly efficient hunters. Their sense of smell is so acute that they can detect a single drop of blood diluted in 25 gallons of water from up to 3 miles away. They also possess electroreception capabilities, allowing them to detect the electrical fields generated by all living creatures, even when prey is hidden or motionless. The decision to allow swimming was made following established safety protocols. 9 crew members, including Heather, eagerly prepared to enter the inviting waters for what should have been a routine recreational break. Safety measures were carefully implemented, with 3 experienced crew members positioned in the rigid inflatable boat to monitor the swimmers and maintain constant surveillance of the surrounding waters. The monitoring crew was equipped with binoculars and had clear sight lines in all directions. Their primary responsibility was to watch for any potential dangers, including marine life that might pose a threat to the swimmers. Additionally, other crew members maintained watch from the ship's deck, positioned high above the waterline for maximum visibility across the ocean's surface. The swimmers entered the water gradually, spreading out across an area roughly 100 feet in diameter around the inflatable boat. The water temperature was perfect, providing immediate relief from the warm afternoon sun. Heather, wearing a standard one-piece swimsuit, felt the familiar embrace of the ocean as she slipped beneath the surface, the salt water providing a refreshing contrast to the months spent breathing recycled ship air. For the first 45 minutes, the swimming session proceeded exactly as planned. Crew members floated peacefully, some swimming gentle laps around the designated area, while others simply treaded water and enjoyed conversation with their colleagues. The monitoring crew maintained their vigilant watch, occasionally calling out instructions to swimmers who drifted too far from the designated area. Heather had positioned herself roughly in the center of the swimming area, about 50 feet from the safety boat. She alternated between floating on her back, gazing up at the endless blue sky, and swimming easy strokes that kept her muscles warm and active. The sensation of being suspended in thousands of feet of ocean water was both exhilarating and humbling, a reminder of humanity's small place in the natural world. The attack came without any warning signs that the monitoring crew could detect. Great white sharks are ambush predators, capable of approaching their prey from below with remarkable stealth. First indication of danger came when one of the boat monitors spotted a dark shadow moving rapidly through the water, approximately 30 feet below the surface. The initial shout of "Shark!" was met with laughter and disbelief from several swimmers. who assumed it was either a joke or a case of mistaken identity. However, as the massive dorsal fin broke the surface just 25 feet from Heather's position, the reality of the situation became terrifyingly clear. The great white shark was enormous, estimated by witnesses at over 16 feet in length, with a girth that suggested a weight of several thousand pounds. Its distinctive triangular dorsal fin cut through the water with mechanical precision, and the crew could see the creature's massive bulk moving just beneath the surface. The shark's behavior indicated it had already selected its target and was moving with the focused determination of a predator committed to attack. Panic erupted among the swimmers as they realized the genuine nature of the threat. Those closest to the safety boat began swimming frantically toward rescue, while others farther away faced the terrifying prospect of covering significant distances through water that now contained a massive predator. The crew in the inflatable vessel immediately began pulling swimmers from the water, working as quickly as possible while maintaining their own safety. The attack came with explosive, devastating violence that shocked even experienced mariners who had witnessed various ocean dangers throughout their careers. The great white struck from directly below, its powerful jaws opening to reveal rows of gleaming teeth as it launched itself upward with tremendous force. The impact as the shark's jaws clamped down on Heather's right ankle sent shockwaves through the water, the sound of crushing bone audible even above the surface. In an instant, Heather was pulled beneath the surface, disappearing into the blue depths as the shark began its characteristic death roll. The predator shook violently from side to side, its powerful neck muscles whipping her body through the water like a rag doll. The shark's teeth penetrated through skin, muscle, and bone, creating devastating wounds that immediately began bleeding profusely into the surrounding water. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 15 to 20 seconds, Heather managed to fight her way back to the surface. Gasping desperately for air and in severe shock from her injuries, she found herself face to face with the monitoring crew who were already extending a broom handle toward her. The makeshift rescue tool was the longest implement available on the inflatable boat, and crew members desperately tried to position it within her reach. But the great white shark wasn't finished with its attack. As Heather reached for the broom handle, the massive predator struck again with even more ferocity than before. This time, the shark targeted her left leg, its jaws clamping down mid-thigh with crushing force. The impact drove Heather underwater once again, and the shark resumed its violent thrashing behavior. The rescue crew, showing incredible bravery under extreme circumstances, grabbed the broom handle and engaged in a deadly tug-of-war with the apex predator. They pulled desperately on Heather's arms and upper body, while the shark maintained its grip on her leg, creating a horrific struggle between human determination and natural predatory instinct. During this nightmarish battle, witnesses heard a sickening pop that echoed across the water. The shark's powerful jaws, exerting thousands of pounds of pressure, had completely severed Heather's left leg at mid-thigh. The limb disappeared into the creature's maw as the crew finally managed to haul her into the safety boat, her body immediately going into shock from the catastrophic trauma and massive blood loss. A crew member who had been cleaning his service pistol in his quarters heard the emergency announcements over the ship's communication system and rushed to the scene. Arriving on deck just as the rescue was taking place, he could see the great white shark still circling near the inflatable boat, its massive form clearly visible just beneath the surface. Without hesitation, the crew member took aim and fired multiple rounds at the predator. His marksmanship proved accurate under extreme pressure, and several bullets found their mark in the shark's head and upper body. The great white's movements became erratic, and within moments, the massive creature sank beneath the surface. Heather was immediately hoisted aboard the Discoverer using the ship's crane system. The ship's medical team began immediate treatment for what were clearly life-threatening injuries. She had lost massive amounts of blood from the severed leg and multiple lacerations caused by the shark's teeth. Her blood pressure had dropped to dangerously low levels, and she was barely conscious. As her condition continued to deteriorate, Heather's heart stopped, requiring the medical team to perform CPR to restore circulation. The ship's doctor and his assistants worked for nearly an hour to stabilize her vital signs. The ship's captain immediately altered course for the nearest port capable of handling a medical emergency, while simultaneously coordinating with Coast Guard and military authorities for possible helicopter evacuation. Despite losing her leg and suffering severe trauma, Heather survived the attack through the combined efforts of the heroic crew. She was eventually transported to Seattle for advanced medical treatment, her survival becoming a testament to human resilience and the importance of emergency preparedness at sea.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.